To the human engineer named Steve, it was just a chocolate chip cookie. But to the alien high command, it was a Class A explosive device. The entire bridge crew frozen in terror as Steve put the weapon into his mouth. They watched him crush the jagged rocks with his teeth and swallow the toxic dust without dying. The aliens realized a terrifying truth that day: humans do not eat for hunger. Humans eat to keep the monster inside them asleep. And God help the galaxy if a human ever gets hangry. The bridge of the massive alien warship, the Zentera, was usually a loud and busy place. But today, it was deadly silent. Every crew member was frozen in fear. They were not looking at an enemy fleet outside the window. They were all looking at the main security screen. On the screen was a single creature. It was a human. His name was Steve. High Commander Zog sat in his command chair. His 3 hearts were beating very fast. He wiped green sweat from his forehead. The Galactic Council had warned him about humans. They said humans came from a death world called Earth. On Earth, the gravity was heavy enough to crush an alien, and the air was full of oxygen, a gas that makes metal rust. But Steve the human was walking around the engine room like it was nothing. He was currently fixing the ship's hyperdrive, but Zog was terrified that Steve might get angry and break the ship in half with his bare hands. Suddenly, Steve stopped working. On the large screen, the human froze. He dropped his wrench on the metal floor with a loud clang. The sound made the alien communication officer jump in fear. Zog leaned forward. He watched closely. Why did the human stop? Was the engine about to explode? Was the human preparing for a battle rage? Slowly, Steve reached his hand into the deep pocket of his blue work pants. The movement was slow and deliberate. Zog held his breath. He signaled his security team to be ready. He thought the human was reaching for a kinetic weapon or a plasma grenade. The tension on the bridge was so thick it felt heavy. Steve's hand came out of his pocket. He was holding a shiny, silver and red bag. It reflected the bright lights of the engine room. To the aliens, the bag looked dangerous. It was crinkled and made of a material they did not recognize. The bright red colors on the bag were the universal sign for high explosive in their culture. Zog's eyes went wide. He thought the human had just pulled out a thermal detonator right next to the fuel core. Then, it happened. Steve grabbed both sides of the shiny bag. He pulled them apart with sudden force. Pop! The sound was sharp and loud. It echoed through the ship's audio speakers. On the bridge, 2 junior officers fainted from the shock. They thought the sound was a hull breach or a gunshot. Zog gripped the arms of his chair so hard that his claws left deep scratches in the metal. The human had armed the device. But Steve did not throw the bag. Instead, he did something even more horrifying. He reached his thick fingers inside the open bag. He pulled out a triangular object. It was orange and covered in strange dust. It looked like a shard of crystallized carbon or a piece of sharp rock. Zog watched in disbelief as the human raised the sharp object to his face. He is not going to. Zog whispered to himself, too scared to speak up. Steve put the orange rock into his mouth. Then, he bit down. Crunch. The sound was terrible. It was the sound of bones breaking. It was the sound of rocks being crushed. The aliens on the bridge covered their sensitive ears. They watched as the human chewed the hard object with his white, calcium-rich teeth. His jaw moved with powerful force. He swallowed the rock and immediately reached into the bag for another one. Zog felt sick. He realized the truth. Humans were not just strong, they were biological furnaces. They consumed solid matter and raw minerals for fuel. The human was eating sharp rocks just to keep his energy up. If a human could eat rocks and find it tasty, what would they do to an alien enemy? Steve continued to eat, unaware that the entire command crew was watching him in horror. He licked the orange dust off his fingers. To the aliens, it looked like he was wiping poison from his skin. Zog turned to his second-in-command. His voice shook with fear. "Raise the shields," Zog ordered quietly. "And lock the cafeteria doors. If the human runs out of his rock fuel, he might try to eat the furniture next." Deep inside the Galactic Council's research station, the atmosphere was even more tense than on the warship. The room was sterile and white, filled with advanced computers and scanning lasers. Usually, this place was used to study rare stars or dangerous viruses. But today, the entire science team was focused on something much smaller. In the center of the room, behind 3 layers of reinforced glass and a magnetic force field, sat a small plastic petri dish. Inside the dish was a tiny, brown crumb. It was a leftover piece of a dark chocolate bar that Steve the human had thrown in the trash. Head scientist Zyler stood behind a thick lead wall, looking at the crumb through a safety monitor. He was the smartest being in the sector, but right now, his tentacles were shaking with terror. He had sent a robotic drone to steal this sample from the human's waste bin. The drone had to be incinerated afterwards, just to be safe. Zyler pressed a blue button on his console to begin the molecular scan. The giant machine in the center of the room hummed to life. A red laser beam hit the brown crumb. The computer screen instantly flashed bright crimson. Alarms began to blare loudly throughout the lab. The analysis machine spat out data faster than Zyler could read it. The chemical composition of the human snack was terrifying. The first ingredient detected was theobromine. To the delicate biology of the Galactic Council species, theobromine was a potent neurotoxin. A single gram was enough to stop the hearts of an entire platoon of soldiers. Zyler gasped as he read the numbers. The concentration in this small crumb was lethal. But the horror did not stop there. The scanner detected a second chemical compound mixed into the brown substance. It was caffeine. Zyler felt faint. Caffeine was a Class A combat stimulant, banned in 12 star systems because it caused extreme aggression and heart explosions. According to the data, the human named Steve had consumed a bar containing 50 milligrams of this poison and had not died. In fact, security footage showed that after eating it, Steve had simply hummed a happy song and tapped his foot. He was using a lethal bioweapon as a recreational treat. Zyler turned to his team of junior researchers. They were huddled in the corner, clutching their clipboards. He explained the findings in a grim voice. He told them that humans must have an evolutionary resistance to poisons that was impossible to understand. The brown block was not food, it was a solidified block of chemical rage. The sugar content alone was enough to overcharge a fusion battery. Zyler realized that humans were not fueled by standard calories. They were fueled by high-grade chemical explosives that they casually bought from vending machines. A horrifying theory began to form in Zyler's large brain. He pulled up a chart of human physiology. He realized that humans did not take these snacks because they were hungry. They took them to control their own power. Without the sugar and caffeine to keep their massive brains running fast, perhaps humans would shut down. Or worse, perhaps without the sedative effects of the chocolate, the humans would become too fast and too strong to control. The final report printed out on a sheet of metal foil. Zyler picked it up with trembling claws. He had to warn the High Council immediately. The humans were not just eating rocks and plants. They were chemically powered super soldiers who dosed themselves with toxins just to feel normal. If the galaxy ran out of coffee or chocolate, the humans might lose control and destroy everything. Zyler looked at the brown crumb one last time. It looked innocent, but he knew it was the most dangerous object in the universe. He marked the file, top secret, the Doom crumbs, and ran to the communication room. The diplomatic meeting room on the star station Unity was designed for peace and calm. The walls were soft blue, and the air smelled like lavender to keep everyone relaxed. Ambassador Sarah, the human representative, had been sitting in a negotiation chair for 7 long hours. The alien delegates, a species called the glip-glorps who looked like tall, elegant mushrooms, did not need to eat often. They absorbed moisture from the air and only ate solid food once a week. They did not understand that Sarah had missed her lunch break. They did not know that a biological timer inside the human body was ticking down toward a disaster. The trouble started with a sound. It was not a loud sound, but in the quiet room, it seemed deafening. A low, rumbling vibration echoed from the center of the table. The glip-glorp leader, High Diplomat Blip, stopped speaking mid-sentence. He looked around in confusion. He checked his seismic sensors. The vibration was coming from inside the human ambassador. Blip's large black eyes widened. He assumed that the human was hiding a small combustion engine under her jacket, or perhaps a sonic weapon. He did not realize it was just Sarah's stomach growling because it was empty. To the aliens, the noise sounded like a wild beast waking up in a dark cave. Sarah shifted in her seat. Her face, usually smiling and kind, had changed. Her skin was slightly pale, and her eyes had narrowed into thin slits. She was tapping her pen against the metal table with a rhythmic, irritating click-click-click. To the alien observers, this was not a sign of boredom or hunger. Their bioscanners picked up a drop in her blood sugar levels and a spike in cortisol, the stress hormone. The ship's medical computer flashed a warning, subject destabilizing. Energy reserves critical. Predatory instincts engaging. The aliens interpreted this data with pure terror. They believed Sarah was running out of fuel and was preparing to hunt the nearest living thing to survive. A young alien assistant entered the room to refill the water glasses. He was nervous and his hands were slippery. Accidentally, he bumped the table and spilled a few drops of water near Sarah's notebook. Under normal circumstances, Sarah would have said it was okay. But today, Sarah was hangry. The combination of hunger and anger had taken over her rational brain. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She looked at the spilled water and let out a frustrated sigh that sounded like a hiss. The glip-glorps recoiled, pressing themselves against the back wall. They thought she was entering a berserker rage. High Diplomat Blip pressed the silent alarm button under the table. He whispered into his communicator that the human had gone rogue. He reported that her civilization mask had slipped off because her energy core was depleted. The security team did not respond with weapons, because they knew bullets would not stop a hungry human. Instead, they responded with the emergency protocol they had developed after watching humans in the cafeteria. They knew that only one thing could calm the beast. The doors to the meeting room hissed open. A squad of armored guards rushed in, but they were not holding laser rifles. The lead guard was holding a long, silver platter. On the platter sat a single, large sandwich filled with turkey and cheese. The guard approached Sarah slowly, trembling in his boots. He held the sandwich out like a peace offering to an angry dragon. He did not make eye contact. He feared that if he looked at her, she might mistake him for the snack. The room was silent as Sarah looked at the sandwich. The tension was unbearable. Sarah grabbed the sandwich. She did not say thank you. She immediately took a massive bite. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as the fuel entered her system. Almost instantly, the tension left her shoulders. Her eyes opened wider. The scary frown disappeared, replaced by a look of contentment. The bioscanners showed her aggression levels dropping to 0. She swallowed and looked at the terrified aliens. "Sorry about that," she said cheerfully, pointing at the sandwich. "I get a little cranky when I don't eat." The aliens nodded slowly, too scared to speak. They realized that human peace was a fragile thing, held together only by bread and cheese. The Grand Council chamber was the most important room in the galaxy, a massive circular hall floating in the center of the station. Thousands of alien representatives sat in hovering pods, looking down at the small platform in the center. Usually, this room was used to declare wars or sign peace treaties. Today, it was being used for something much strange. It was an intervention. The council had gathered to speak to the human representative, a man named Mark, about his species' dangerous addiction to chemical stimulants. Mark stood alone in the spotlight, looking relaxed and holding a plastic cup of coffee. To the aliens, the steam rising from the cup looked like toxic gas venting from a chemical weapon. The High Counselor, a being made of floating blue crystals, began the session with a booming voice that shook the walls. He projected a hologram into the air for everyone to see. The image showed a timeline of human activity. It showed humans eating breakfast, then a snack, then lunch, then another snack, and finally dinner. The counselor explained that no other species in the galaxy required fuel intake so frequently. Most civilized species charged their energy cells once a week or absorbed solar radiation. The council had concluded that humans were not eating for survival, but were constantly dosing themselves with performance-enhancing drugs to maintain a state of hyperaggression. They believed the humans were preparing for a galactic conquest, one sandwich at a time. Mark listened to the accusations with a confused expression. The High Counselor demanded that humanity immediately stop their snack breaks. He proposed a new schedule where humans would only be allowed to consume nutrients once every 3 days, like a normal species. He warned that if the humans did not stop their addiction to sugar and carbohydrates, the Council would be forced to quarantine Earth. The aliens believed they were being helpful. They thought they were saving the humans from a toxic dependency. They waited for Mark to thank them for their wisdom and guidance. Instead of thanking them, Mark took a long sip of his coffee. The dark liquid disappeared into his mouth, and the aliens flinched, expecting him to convulse from the poison. Mark calmly explained that there was a misunderstanding. He tried to simplify human biology for them. He told them that humans were warm-blooded creatures with extremely fast metabolisms. He used the phrase, burn calories, to explain how human bodies generated heat and movement. Unfortunately, the universal translator interpreted this phrase literally. The aliens heard that humans had a literal fire burning inside their stomachs that required constant fuel to keep from extinguishing. A wave of panicked murmurs rippled through the council chamber. The aliens looked at each other with wide eyes. They suddenly understood why human skin was always so warm to the touch. They realized that humans were not just biological beings, they were walking, living furnaces. Mark continued his explanation, unaware of the terror he was causing. He said that if a human stopped eating, their body would begin to consume its own fat and muscle reserves. He meant this as a scientific fact, but the aliens heard it as a horror story. They imagined a human body eating itself from the inside out in a desperate bid to keep the internal fire raging. The High Counselor's crystals dimmed in fear. He asked what would happen if a human ran out of internal reserves. Mark shrugged and said simply that they would starve and die. But then he added a joke. He said that before dying, a starving human would become incredibly irritable and dangerous, capable of destroying anything standing between them and a burger. The council fell into a stunned silence. They realized they could not stop the humans from eating. If they tried to cut off the food supply, the humans would either die or, much worse, turn their hunger toward the other species in the room. The intervention had failed completely. Instead of controlling the humans, the council realized they were trapped in a room with millions of hungry predators who needed to burn fuel every few hours just to stay sane. The humans aboard the station wanted to show the aliens that they were friendly and cultured. They decided to host a traditional Earth event in the main hangar bay. They called it Taco Tuesday. The humans set up long tables with bright decorations and played festive music. The smell of cooked meat, corn, and spices filled the air. To the humans, the smell was delicious and inviting. However, to the sensitive noses of the alien guests, the air smelled like a chemical fire mixed with sulfur. General Krell, a high-ranking alien warrior covered in thick green armor scales, had agreed to attend. He wanted to prove that his species was brave and could handle the soft food of the humans. He walked up to the food stand with his chest puffed out, ready to conquer the meal. A human cook smiled warmly and handed General Krell a hard-shell taco. Inside the shell was meat, lettuce, cheese, and a generous amount of bright red salsa. The cook warned Krell that the sauce was a little spicy, but the general did not understand the warning. In his language, the word spicy did not exist. The closest translation was radioactive. Krell looked at the red liquid dripping from the shell. His tactical helmet scanner analyzed the substance and identified it as capsaicin. On Krell's home planet, this chemical was a defense mechanism used by poisonous plants to kill insects. It was a potent neurotoxin designed to cause burning pain on contact. Krell assumed the humans had removed the poison and left only the texture. He was very wrong. Krell opened his large, lizard-like mouth and took a massive bite. He crunched the shell and swallowed the sauce in one go. For 3 seconds, the hangar bay was silent. The general chewed thoughtfully. The humans watched him with smiles, waiting for a compliment. Then, the chemical reaction hit. The capsaicin bonded to the pain receptors in Krell's mouth and throat. His brain received a sudden, violent signal that his tongue was literally on fire. Krell's eyes bulged out of his head. His green skin turned a dark, unhealthy shade of purple. He dropped the taco and grabbed his throat with both claws. A strange, high-pitched wheezing sound escaped his lips. The heat in his mouth felt like he had just swallowed a plasma bolt. The general fell to his knees, gasping for air. Smoke actually seemed to be curling out of his nostrils because his internal body temperature skyrocketed to fight the toxin. The human cook saw the general panic and tried to help by offering a glass of milk. But Krell was too far gone. He began to wave his claws frantically, signaling for a medic. The other aliens in the room screamed and pulled out their weapons. They thought the humans had attempted to assassinate the general with a biological weapon. "The food is trapped with acid," one alien soldier yelled. Security drones rushed in and dragged the general away to the medical bay, convinced he would need surgery to replace his melted throat. However, the most terrifying part for the alien observers was not the general's collapse. It was what happened next. The aliens looked back at the tables, expecting the humans to be running away from the poisonous food in fear. Instead, the humans were still eating. Not only were they eating the same tacos that had nearly killed a war hero, but they were adding more of the red poison sauce from a bottle labeled Diablo Fire. They were laughing and chatting casually. One human wiped sweat from his forehead, took a bite of a pepper, and said, "Wow, this kicks hard, I love it." The aliens froze in disbelief. They watched the humans voluntarily inflict pain on themselves for fun. The report that went back to the Galactic Council that night was grim. The aliens realized that humans were immune to pain in a way that defied all biological logic. They did not just survive dangerous chemicals, they craved them. The council scientists theorized that humans had destroyed their own nerve endings through years of eating toxic plants. The Taco Tuesday incident changed the way the galaxy viewed Earth. Humans were no longer just hungry biological furnaces, they were masochistic monsters who ate fire and called it flavor. The council decided then and there that they could never torture a human for information. If a human could smile while eating Diablo Fire sauce, no alien interrogation tool would ever scare them. The Galactic Council had finally admitted defeat. After weeks of analyzing the terrifying data regarding human biology, the High Counselors realized that they could not change the humans. They could not stop the humans from consuming combat stimulants, like coffee, nor could they prevent the humans from entering the dangerous, hangry state when their fuel reserves ran low. The disastrous events of the Spicy Taco Tuesday had proven that humans were simply too tough and too unpredictable to control through force. If the council tried to ban snacks, the humans would likely revolt, and a hungry human revolution was a nightmare scenario that no alien government wanted to face. The council decided that if they could not stop the human hunger, they had to control it. For the safety of the entire galaxy, a new strategy was required. The High Counselor stood before the assembly and announced the creation of the most important legislation in galactic history. It was officially named the Human Sustenance and Pacification Act, but most crews simply called it the Snack Law. The law declared that human hunger was now a Class 1 safety hazard, ranked equally with hull breaches and radiation leaks. The document stated that no human being was allowed to go more than 4 standard hours without consuming solid fuel. It was no longer a personal choice, it was a mandatory safety regulation. The aliens believed that by keeping the humans constantly full, they could keep the dangerous internal beast asleep. If a human stomach started to growl, it was legally considered a pre-combat warning siren, and immediate action was required by all crew members nearby. The implementation of the new law was swift and expensive. Every spaceship, space station, and outpost that hosted human personnel had to be retrofitted immediately. Engineering teams worked day and night to install nutrient stabilization units, which the humans simply called vending machines. To the aliens, these machines were not just dispensers of treats, they were critical life support systems designed to prevent a massacre. The machines were stocked with high-priority items like chocolate bars, potato chips, and sugary sodas. These items were transported in armored convoys, guarded by heavy security, because the aliens believed these chemical stabilizers were the only thing standing between peace and total destruction. A new training protocol was introduced for all alien officers. They were taught how to recognize the early signs of human hunger. The training manuals included diagrams of a human face changing from happy to irritable. If a human sighed loudly, tapped their foot, or stared blankly at a wall, the officers were instructed to deploy a snack immediately. The manual warned that engaging a hungry human in conversation was a tactical error. The correct procedure was to throw a bag of chips from a safe distance and wait for the crunching sounds to begin. Only after the human had finished the snack was it safe to approach them with work orders or questions. The aliens treated this duty with the same seriousness as disarming a bomb. Months later, on the warship Zentera, High Commander Zog walked nervously down the hallway toward the engineering bay. He checked the digital timer on his wrist. It had been exactly 3 hours and 50 minutes since the human engineer, Steve, had last eaten. Zog's heart raced with anxiety. He did not want to risk a Hangry incident on his watch. He carried a small, sealed box in his claws. Inside the box was a granola bar, a dense brick of grains and honey that the scientists claimed was excellent for suppressing human rage. Zog approached the engine room door and took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He signaled his security team to stand back, he would face the creature alone. Steve was busy welding a broken pipe, his safety mask covering his face. He did not hear the commander enter. Zog moved slowly, holding the granola bar out like a weapon. He tapped Steve on the shoulder with a trembling claw. Steve turned around, lifted his mask, and wiped sweat from his brow. Before Steve could speak, Zog thrust the food into his hands. The commander pleaded with his eyes, silently begging the human to consume the stabilizer. Steve looked at the bar, smiled, and said it was perfect timing because he was feeling a bit peckish. As Steve unwrapped the bar and took a bite, Zog let out a long, shuddering breath of relief. The beast had been fed. The ship was safe. The Galactic Council's law was working, ensuring peace in the universe, one snack at a time.